Welcome to the Avram Davidson universe, where you will get to listen to some of the best short stories ever written. As a youth, Neil Gaiman fell in love with Avram's stories. Philip K. Dick adored him. Ursula Le Guin thought his tales wonderful, and Ray Bradbury compared him to Kipling. Each episode will include a special guest, an amazing short story, and a discussion of that story. Enjoy classic tales such as O'er All the Seas with Oysters, The Golem, The Sources of the Nile, and many others.
How could you be? It sounds like a story to me, yeah. Sounds like a story to me.
All right, we're live.
All right.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And the one thing I wanted to say is, you have been such an incredible advocate for Avram, and I just can't thank you enough with everything that you've done and forwards, afterwards. So I really appreciate it.
Well, when the Avram Davidson Treasury came out, I looked over it, and well, the first thing was I was just amazed that there were so many first rank stories that I had never read, because I consider myself a major fan of Avram for decades. And after a writer is dead, it's a pleasure to discover a decent story from them that you haven't read. But he had written so many stories and published them so widely. There were lots I'd never encountered. And I will say right here at the beginning that after going through the Treasury, reading everything, I concluded that Avram is probably the best American short fiction writer of the 20th century.
Yeah.
I could not think of anybody comparable.
Why do you think he isn't better recognized?
Because he's the best short fiction writer of the 20th century. Everybody now, all the glory now is invested in novels, and novels were not his forte.
Mm-hmm.
He could write a really, really good first volume of a trilogy, but he would never finish them. So his best work was all in short fiction, and short fiction is simply not treasured the way it should be.
Right. I've been reading it. I don't know how much you know about my background, but I've been slowly going through all of his stories, and there's so many, and even the Treasury, I feel like it's a drop in the bucket. And many of the stories that I think are his greatest aren't in the Treasury, which I find incredible. Now, how did you get so involved? I know you met my mom and dad at one point, and but how did you get involved in this whole thing with helping her and with all the Avram work?
Well, people ask me to. Basically, Jacob Weissman at Tachyon asked me to do an introduction to The Boss on the Wall, which is a pretty amazing work. It's as you know, it's a horror novella.
Yep.
And it was based on a very vivid dream that Avram had. And I don't think non-writers can appreciate what an accomplishment it is to take a dream and a real dream and convert it into fiction. It is one of the hardest tasks there is. And with Granya's help, he managed it.
Well, and my understanding is that's from a much larger, maybe unfinished novel, or almost. It was a little confusing there, but it was a much larger story that it pulled parts out of.
Yeah, I got the feeling that he had written an enormous amounts, and that Grania pruned it down into something that was publishable.
That's great. I don't know if you're aware. So one of the things that I've been doing that I really enjoy, aside from reading, is I love audiobooks. I go for lots of runs, and so I'm converting a lot of Avram's stuff into audiobooks. So interestingly enough, Boss on the Wall is now available on audio. And do you know Splatterlight, Jack Vance's publishing company. They're publishing a lot of his work.
Yeah, I know them. We're publishing all of his work, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've joined them in some things, and they're actually publishing. Someone loved Boss on the Wall in Holland, and so they're going to actually publish that in Dutch. Well, in terms of your favorite Avram story, I mean, do you have a favorite?
Well, it changes with the season. It depends what my mood is. His best stuff is up there to the point where it's almost blasphemous to like pick one and say this is better than My Boyfriend's Name is Jello, for example. But if I had to pick a favorite, I would pick All the Seas with Oysters for an extra literary reason, which is that it gave him a hobby in his old age, because that story escaped. The idea that escaped, and I was in high school when I first heard the idea that safety pins were the larval form of clothes hangers,
Yeah, yeah.
and so this became part of urban folklore, and sort of passed around with gentle mutations here and there, and so every now and then, some columnist for a newspaper would hear of this and then write up about it. And somebody would notify Avram, and Avram would either write to this journalist or phone him, I don't know which, and explain gently that this was a story he had written, and include a copy of the story, and then get into a conversation with this journalist, who would then go on to write an article about this fascinating man he'd discovered. And it didn't happen just once, but it happened some like 4 or 5 different times.
Oh my gosh.
And every time he just charmed the pants off of somebody who's glad to have the easy inches.
Yeah. Well, I know, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how, and for me, it is not about monetizing or any of that. It's just about the appreciation and getting his work out there. And I feel like the only way to do that these days for an author like that is if suddenly it became a Netflix, series. And I actually, as an example, I watched Ice Age in Love, Death, and Robots, which I absolutely adored. I mean, so much fun. And I think, so many of his stories could be great for either an entire series, Black Mirror type thing, or a smattering of some of his stories. Any thoughts on that? And again, I love that story and Love, Death, and Robots. Any thoughts on that?
Not really. I'm like the least commercial human being on earth.
Yeah.
Except that, I will observe he had an astonishing range. So pretty much anything that you could do with a short story, he's got a short story you could do that with.
Yeah.
He had Twilight Zone type short stories. He had very dark short stories and very funny short stories. I mean, Golem, which is I think his second science fiction sale. It's just a military killer robot gone berserk is bested by an old Jewish couple sitting on their porch talking in Yiddish.
or time travel with like full chicken richness. I mean, do you know that story?
Dodo, yes.
Why would you? I mean, my gosh. Or of course, and I don't know how you would do this, but the Esterhazy series, which, I mean, it still blows me away. I don't know
that could be done right. It wouldn't be easy, but
no.
Some of the television series that you're seeing now on streaming sort of indicate it could be done. There's a surprising amount of really good writers out there who apparently, up until recently, were just sitting there writing wonderful stuff that never got made.
Right. Well, I know we're going to be listening to My Boyfriend's Name is Jello, and I know it was in the first in the fantasy and science fiction in July 1954. I don't think you can see in the background, but I have it up on the screen in terms of the cover. But tell me why, and taking a step back on that, it's as you know, it's 4 pages, it's tiny, and yet there's so much in there. Why you chose that story, and any thoughts about it before we listen to it.
Well, somebody once defined a novel as being a work of prose fiction at least 40,000 words long, with something wrong about it. Nobody's ever written a perfect novel, but a lot of people have written perfect stories. And Avram wrote way more than his share of perfect stories, and this is one of them. I would not change a word of it. And what's amazing about it was his first science fiction sale. So right from the beginning, he had this enormous wit, this fantastic erudition, and this great control over the plot. There's as an admirer of the craft of fiction, I see this as like a machine with an absolute minimum number of working parts, of moving parts. Just beautiful, gleaming, perfect.
Wow. Well, let's go to it.
Okay.
My boyfriend's name is Jello. Fashion. Nothing but fashion. Virus X having in the medical zodiac its course half run. The physician, I refuse to say doctor, and indeed am tempted to use the more correct apothecary. The physician, I say, tells me I have virus Y. No doubt in the Navy it would still be called catarrhal fever. They say that hardly anyone had appendicitis until Edward VII came down with it a few weeks before his coronation and thus made it fashionable. He, the medical man, is dosing me with injections of some stuff that comes in vials. A few centuries ago, he would have used herbal clysters. Where did I read that old remedy for the quinsy? Putrescent sore throat, says my dictionary. Take 7 weeds from 7 meads, and 7 nails from 7 steeds. Oh dear, how my mind runs on. I must be feverish. An ague, no doubt. Well, rather an ague than a pox. A pox is something one wishes on editors. Strange breed, editors. The females all have names like Lulu Amabel Smith or Minnie Lundquist Bloom, and the males have little horns growing out of their brows. They must all be Quakers, I suppose, for their letters invariably begin Dear Richard Roe or Dear John Doe, as if the word Mr. were a vanity, when they write at all, that is. And meanwhile, Goodwife moves coals weekly for the rent. If I ever have a son, than which nothing is more unlikely, who shows the slightest inclination of becoming a writer, I shall instantly prentice him to a fishmonger or a master chimney sweep. Don't write about sex, the editors say, and don't write about religion or about history. If, however, you do write about history, be sure to add religion and sex. If one sends in a story about a celibate atheist, however, do you think they'll buy it? In front of the house, 2 little girls are playing one of those clap-handy games. Right hand, left hand, cross hands on bosom, left hand, right hand. It makes one dizzy to watch. And singing the while, My boyfriend's name is Jello. He comes from Cincinnati, with a pimple on his nose and 3 fat toes, and that's the way my story goes. There's a pleasing surrealist quality to this which intrigues me. In general, I find little girls enchanting. What a shame they grow up to be big girls and make our lives as miserable as we allow them, and oft times more. Silly, nasty-minded critics trying to make poor Dodgson a monster of abnormality simply because he loved Alice and was capable of following her into Wonderland. I suppose they would have preferred him to have taken a country curacy and become another Pastor Quiverful, a perfectly normal and perfectly horrible existence, and one which would have left us all still on this side of the looking-glass. Whatever was in those vials doesn't seem to be helping me. I suppose old Dover's famous powders hadn't the slightest fatal effect on the germs, bacteria, or viri, but at least they gave one a good old sweat, ipecac, and a mild, non-habit-forming jag, opium, but they're old-fashioned now, and so there we go again, round and round, one's train of thought like a Japanese waltzing mouse. I used to know a Japanese who— Now stop that. Distract yourself. Talk to the little girls. Well, that was a pleasant interlude. We discussed, quite gravely, for I never condescend to children, the inconveniences of being sick, the unpleasantness of the heat. We agreed that a good rain would cool things off. Then their attention began to falter, and I lay back again. Miss Thurl may be in soon. Mrs. Moose, a perfect name, she likes only the antlers, said, whilst bringing in the bowl of slops which the medicine man allows me for victuals, said, "My sister is coming along later, and she's going to fix you up some nice flowers." Miss Thurl, I do believe, spends most of her time fixing flowers. Weekends, she joins a confraternity of overgrown campfire girls and boys who go on hiking trips, comes back sunburned and sweating and carrying specimen samples of plant and lesser animal life. However, I must say for Miss Thurl that she is quiet. Her brother-in-law, the bull moose, would be in here all the time if I suffered it. He puts stupid quotations in other people's mouths. He will talk about the weather, and I will not utter a word. Then he will say, "Well, it's like you say, it's not the heat but the humidity." Thinking of which, I notice a drop in the heat, and I see it is raining. That should cool things off. How pleasant. A pity that it is washing away the marks of the little girl's last game. They played this one on the sidewalk, with chalked-out patterns and bits of stone and broken glass. They chanted and hopped back and forth across the chalk marks and shoved the bits of stone and glass, or were they potsherds? Potsy, from potsherd, perhaps? I shall write a monograph, should I ever desire a Ph.D. I will compare the chalk marks with Toltec emblems and Mason's marks, and the signs which Hindu holy men smear on themselves with wood ashes and perfumed cow dung. All this passes for erudition. I feel terrible, despite the cool rain. Perhaps without it I should feel worse. Miss Thurl was just here. A huge bowl of blossoms arranged on the table across the room. Intricately arranged, I should say. But she put some extra touches to it, humming to herself. Something ever so faintly reminiscent about that tune, and vaguely disturbing. Then she made one of her rare remarks. She said that I needed a wife to take care of me. My blood ran cold. An icy sweat, to quote Catullus, that wretched Priapist, bedewed my limbs. I moaned. Miss Thurl at once departed, murmuring something about a cup of tea. If I weren't so weak, I'd knot my bedsheets together and escape. But I am terribly feeble. It's unmanly to weep. Back she came, literally poured the tea down my throat. A curious taste it had. Sassafras, bergamot, mandrake root. It is impossible to say how old Miss Thurl is. She wears her hair parted in the center and looped back. Ageless. I thank whatever gods may be that Mr. Aiello came in just then. The other boarder upstairs, a greengrocer, decent fellow, a bit short-tempered. He wished me soon well. He complained he had his own troubles, foot troubles. I scarcely listened, just chattered, hoping the Thurl would get her hence. Toes. Something about his toes. Swollen, 3 of them, quite painful. A bell tinkled in my brain. I asked him how he spelt his name. Ajello. Curious. I never thought of that. Now I wonder what he could have done to offend the little girls. Chase them from in front of his store, perhaps. There is a distinct reddish spot on his nose. By tomorrow he will have an American Beauty of a pimple. Fortunately, he and Miss Thurl went out together. I must think this through. I must remain cool. Aroint thee, thou mist of fever. This much is obvious. There are sorcerers about. Sorceresses, I mean. The little ones made rain, and they laid a minor curse on poor Aiello. The elder one has struck me in the very vitals, however. If I had a cow, it would doubtless be dry by this time. Should I struggle? Should I submit? Who knows what lies behind those moss-colored eyes? What thoughts inside the skull covered by those heavy tresses? Life with Mr. and Mrs. Moose is, even by itself, too frightful to contemplate. Why doesn't she lay her traps for Aiello? Why should I be selected as the milk-white victim for the hymeneal sacrifice? Useless to question. Few men have escaped once the female cast the runes upon them. And the all-opath has nothing in his little black bag either which can cure. Blessed association of words. All-opath, homeopath, homoios, the like, the same, pathos, feeling, suffering, similia similibus curantur. The little girls are playing beneath my window once more, clapping hands and singing. Something about a boyfriend named Tony who eats macaroni, has a great big knife and a pretty little wife, and will always lead a happy life. That must be the butcher opposite. He's always kind to the children. Strength. Strength. The work of a moment to get 2 coins from my wallet and throw them down. What little girl could resist picking up a dime which fell in front of her? Cross my palm with silver, pretty gentleman, eh? And now to tell them my tale. I feel better already. I don't think I'll see Miss Thurl again for a while. She opened the door, the front door, and when the children had sung the new verse, she slammed the door shut quite viciously. It's too bad about Aiello, but every man for himself. Listen to them singing away, bless their little hearts. I love little girls. Such sweet, innocent voices. My boyfriend will soon be healthy. He shall be very wealthy. No woman shall harry or seek to marry. 2 and 2 is 4, and 1 to carry. It will be pleasant to be wealthy, I hope. I must ask Aiello where Cincinnello is.
So what'd you think?
I think it's a beautiful story. It's like a little machine with an absolute minimum number of working parts. And as a writer myself, I am always watching the craft in a story. And the craft in the story is astonishing, particularly given this was his first science fiction sale. So much of what he had was there from the beginning.
You know, one of the things that I I mean, I love this story, but I also struggled with it in the sense that, I don't come from a literary background. I come from a legal background. And I found it, like, I couldn't decide whether it was incredibly complex or really simple, or both. And any thoughts on that?
There's absolutely no contradiction between it being simple and being complicated. It implies a great complexity of a world. The fact that in this little story, all the magic is performed by women and girls. Fritz Leiber, who is a fantastic writer, took an entire novel to do the same, to play out the same idea. I don't know if you noticed it. The little girls, you never hear from or see the little girls directly. You only have the narrator's report, and he never gives you the words that they speak to him with. And in the text, he goes, "Well, I'm going to talk to the girls now," and there's a little ellipses, and then he says, "Well, that was very pleasant." and by doing this, he makes them distanced and mysterious, while at the same time, from his reportage, definitely they're just little girls. They're not special little girls. They're like all other little girls.
I looked up, interestingly to me, I looked up clapping games because I just thought that was interesting in terms of it's I don't think it's as common anymore. Maybe we've forgotten about clapping games as we get older. We're not out on the schoolyard, but patty cake. And it was interesting looking at some of them. I mean, some of them are mean. And if they truly have magical powers, I mean, really, really mean. And I thought that was kind of fascinating.
I grew up in the 1950s, and it was kind of spooky. The girls could do these clapping games and the jump rope things.
Yep.
And boys didn't do anything nearly so complicated.
I looked up patty cake, and surprisingly came out. I think first time it was recorded was in 1698, and then they talked about other clapping games even earlier in the early 1600s. So it seems to be a long tradition.
There are theories that these go back into prehistory, and that some of them were perhaps employed in choosing victims at religious sacrifices.
Well, one of the things that I always do, which is kind of fun for me, is and this one, I don't know how you would make this into a Netflix or an Amazon special, but I always love to. I mean, there really aren't that many characters, although there could be a whole bunch of characters depending on how you did it. But I always like to pick an actor for different characters, and so for the narrator, Paul Giamatti, which I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the guy who was on Colbert, who loves Avram Davidson's work, and then Mr. Aiello, I thought Russell Crowe would be kind of fun. And then Mrs. Thurl, I thought Laura Dern would be kind of fun. But any thoughts on that? Or
well, for the narrator, I can answer that. I was thinking about that, and I thought, excuse me, young Orson Welles would have been really lovely for the narrator, because it's all about the voice and the control. Strangely enough, Daniel Radcliffe, not the Harry Potter Daniel Radcliffe, but the one, the actor he's become, the one who played in Bulgakov's Notebooks of a Country Doctor. If you've ever seen that,
haven't, but...
quite a marvelous thing. But he had that tightness and control that character would require.
Wow.
Yeah, I also noticed in that story that it's kind of a fierce world that he's in, where people are, in competition with each other, and that the narrator establishes being a good guy through two things. The first is that he always treats children with respect
Mhm.
and never talks down to them. And that tells us he's a good guy. And then at the end, where he goes, so I'm going to be rich. I hope that's pleasant. he's not greedy. He's just going, well, that might be nice, I hope.
Well, you know, I think sometimes, and I could be completely wrong, but sometimes I think that the narrator is Avram, that he's the actual character. I mean, a lot of those traits, he was incredibly respectful to children, always treated them with a great deal of respect. You know, I know he had a lot of pains from the war. You know, just looking at that character, I thought maybe that could be Avram.
I thought yes and no. On the yes front, he has two types of erudition. He has that self-taught book erudition, where he knows obviously pretty much everything from incredibly wide reading.
Yeah.
But he also has a knowledge of the everyday life on the streets. And Avram, um, he was almost a scholar of the urban life of his childhood.
Yeah.
I was in correspondence with him, and I said something about my wife being Ruthenian, which is an almost vanished nationality. And he wrote a paragraph about the ethnicities in, I think, Yonkers, and it was as good as a book by anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, if you in reading his work, I mean, that seems to be an area that he focuses on a lot, whether it be in the world of the Esterhazy world, or whether it be in I don't know how much, you know, I know I sent over, and I'm not going to talk about the name or anything yet, but the novel that I'm planning to have published at some point in the near future. I mean, obviously that takes place at a time where he's talking about a lot of the different ethnicities. I mean, he seemed to have that really dialed in. And in a lot of his stories, the Slovo stove, I mean,
that's one of my favorite stories. I think that is the best story ever written about losing ethnicity, which is what happens to people when they come to America. You know, and it will disappear in 3 generations. I've seen it happen.
Wow. Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. I can't thank you enough. You know, is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
Yeah, I want to put something down on the record that I've never written down any place or recorded anywhere. I once did Avram a favor, and I did not find this out for decades.
Okay.
And he never found it out. But when I was in college, I had an informal mentor, was Dr. Jenkins, who was a very interesting and quite eccentric man in many good ways. And I spent 4 years telling everybody about how wonderful science fiction was. And then I graduated, I went away, and I got my alumni news thing, and it said that Avram Davidson was the writer in residence at William and Mary for that year after I left. I was going, oh, I can't believe it. I would have loved to have met Avram Davidson. And then, in the late 90s, early part of the century, I realized I had never actually thanked Dr. Jenkins for everything he'd done. Wow. So, you know, I wrote to him. I went back to William and Mary, and spent an evening with him to thank him. And he told me that, he said, you know, when you were always talking about science fiction. So the next year I decided, well, we should have the writer in residence, we should consider having a science fiction writer. And they said, a good one, I mean, somebody literary. So I was the instigation for Avram getting 1 year at William and Mary. And I understand that he enjoyed it. I know Dr. Jenkins told me that the students loved him.
Wow.
And I read somewhere that when he left, he took with him reams and reams of Avram Davidson writer in residence letterhead.
Oh my gosh. Well, you know, one of the things that I know, I'll finish up with this, and I'm so sad that I can't find it, is I know in some of his lectures, he did a lot of the, was it the unhistory, the different character, the different mythological creatures.
Mhm.
And I had, when I was growing up, an entire tape deck, like 5 or 6 tapes of him talking about each different mythological creature that were
Wow.
from his lectures. And I don't know where they are. And oh my gosh, if anyone's listening to this happens to have them, wow, would I love to have those, because they were something special.
That would be great.
So, well, you know, I can't thank you enough. You know, definitely anytime you want to come on again, obviously let me know. I'm having a ton of fun recording these and bringing these to life. So again, thank you.
It was my pleasure.